A single dad takes in a stray dog to cheer up his daughter. He never expected the call that would change their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The rain came soft and steady, soaking the cracked pavement and turning the gravel driveway into a muddy mess. Michael Carter pulled his old flannel tighter around his shoulders as he stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking under his boots. It was just past 7, the kind of gray evening where the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to drizzle or pour. He had just finished washing the dinner dishes, Emily already in her pajamas, curled up on the couch with her nose in the same tattered fairy tale book she read every other night. And then he saw it, just past the porch steps, huddled under the rusted garden bench, a dog. At first, Michael thought it might be a neighbor's pet, lost or scared by the storm, but as he stepped closer, he saw the creature was all bones and matted fur, shivering from cold and nerves. Its coat was a dirty patchwork of white and brown, soaked through, with burrs tangled in its tail and a limp in one back leg. A red bandana, faded and frayed, hung loosely around its neck. "Hey, buddy," Michael said quietly, crouching down a few feet away. "Where'd you come from?" The dog didn't move, didn't growl, just stared at him with big, uncertain eyes. Michael had seen that look before, in the mirror some mornings, and once or twice in Emily's, when she thought he wasn't watching. It was the look of someone holding on, even when they weren't sure why. Emily peeked out from behind the screen door. "Dad," she whispered, "is that a dog?" Michael nodded slowly. "Looks like." "Can we help him?" Her voice was small but sure, the same way it had been when she asked if they'd be okay after the funeral. He glanced back at the mutt, who hadn't budged, then to Emily, then back again. "Yeah," he said, "I think we can." He stepped inside for a towel and a piece of leftover chicken. It wasn't much, but sometimes a little kindness was all it took to change the course of a life, even a scruffy one waiting in the rain. By morning, the rain had passed, leaving behind a sky the color of steel wool and a backyard scattered with puddles. The dog, still damp, still quiet, had spent the night curled in an old quilt Michael laid out in the mudroom. He hadn't barked or whimpered once, just watched with those cautious eyes like he wasn't sure whether this place was safe or temporary. Emily was up before the alarm, feet padding across the floor in mismatched socks, hair wild from sleep. When she saw the bundle of fur lying by the dryer, she froze. "He stayed," she whispered. Michael nodded from the kitchen, sipping his lukewarm coffee. "Looks like he figured we weren't so bad." Emily crouched beside the dog, holding out a small hand. "Hi," she said, voice soft and sweet. "I'm Emily. You can stay if you want." The dog lifted his head slightly, then, slowly, moved his nose toward her fingers. It wasn't a full wag, not yet, but his tail gave a hopeful twitch. Emily grinned. Over breakfast, she brainstormed names between bites of cereal, rattling off everything from Mr. Wiggles to Thunderstorm. Michael offered a few half-hearted suggestions, Tank, maybe Scraps, but none stuck. The dog padded into the kitchen, ears perked when Emily dropped a piece of toast, and she giggled. "He's lucky," she said suddenly. "I mean, really lucky. It was raining, and he had nowhere to go, and then he found us. That's got to mean something." Michael looked at the dog, who was now lying under the table like he'd always belonged there, then at his daughter, her cheeks still rosy from sleep, her eyes bright in a way they hadn't been for months. "Yeah," he said, "lucky fits." That afternoon, Emily insisted on showing Lucky her favorite spots: the backyard fort made of plywood scraps, the swing Michael hung from the maple tree, the place behind the garage where wild daisies sometimes bloomed. Lucky followed close behind, limping slightly, but content. And when Emily curled up on the couch that night, Lucky was beside her, head resting on her knee like it had always been his place. For the first time in a long time, the house felt full. Michael watched them, a quiet warmth settling in his chest. Maybe they were all lucky, in their own way. The next morning brought the first real sunshine in days, thin golden light streaming through the kitchen window, catching dust motes in its path. Michael stood at the counter, absent-mindedly stirring sugar into his coffee as Lucky snoozed on the rug near the door. Emily was already dressed, tugging on her sneakers, and trying to coax Lucky to follow her upstairs for a fashion show she had planned. The dog barely opened an eye. "He's tired," Michael said, taking a sip. "Probably been running for a while." Emily nodded solemnly, brushing her fingers gently through Lucky's fur. "He's still a good boy." That part, at least, wasn't in question. After dropping Emily off at school, Michael loaded Lucky into the passenger seat of his rusted pickup, after laying down a towel to protect the already worn upholstery, and headed toward the town vet. It wasn't that he wanted to give the dog up, necessarily, but if someone out there was missing him, it wasn't right to keep him a secret. The bell over the clinic door jingled as they entered, the scent of antiseptic and fur hitting immediately. Behind the counter, Margie, the vet tech who'd known Michael since high school, looked up and raised a brow. "Well, well," she said, peering over her glasses, "you finally caved and got Emily that dog she's been begging for?" Michael smiled faintly. "Not exactly. He found us." Margie led them to an exam room, where the vet scanned Lucky with a microchip reader. The machine beeped once, then fell silent. She tried again, different angles, then shook her head. "Nothing. No chip, no tattoo, no registration tag, just that bandana," she said, pointing to the worn red cloth around Lucky's neck. "Could have come from anywhere." Michael unclipped the fabric gently and turned it over. No name, no number, just frayed edges and old stitching. It was more keepsake than clue. "So what now?" he asked. Margie shrugged. "Put up some flyers, check the local shelter, maybe post online. But if no one claims him..." She gave Lucky a quick scratch behind the ears. "Looks like you've got yourself a roommate." As Michael drove home with Lucky riding shotgun, head out the window, he couldn't shake the feeling that the dog hadn't just gotten lost. He had been looking for something, maybe even someone. Bills were piling up again, stacked on the kitchen counter in their silent, accusing way. Michael skimmed the top envelope, a pink notice from the utility company, before sliding it beneath the others like that would somehow make it disappear. The garage had been slow lately, too many folks putting off repairs they couldn't afford, and Michael wasn't the kind of man to push someone when he knew they were struggling, because he understood exactly what that felt like. Still, when he stepped through the door each evening, covered in grease and bone-tired from a 10-hour shift, there was something waiting for him now that hadn't been there before. A soft tail thump, a pair of watchful, patient eyes, a reminder that not everything had to feel so heavy. Lucky met him at the door like clockwork, sometimes dragging one of Emily's stuffed animals in his mouth, sometimes just wagging his tail like Michael was the best part of his day. And maybe, in some strange way, he was. The feeling was mutual. Emily had fully adopted Lucky into their lives, as if he'd always been there. She made him a cardboard name tag, insisted on brushing his fur every morning, and read him bedtime stories in the evenings, even when he fell asleep halfway through. Michael would peek in on them some nights. Emily curled beneath her quilt, Lucky stretched across the foot of her bed like a furry sentry. The house felt warmer now. Not physically, it was still drafty, especially in the upstairs hallway, but something about it buzzed with a different kind of energy, the kind that didn't come from light switches or heating vents, the kind that came from laughter echoing down the hall, from muddy paw prints tracked across the floor, from a child's sudden bursts of joy that didn't feel forced anymore. Michael still worried about money, about doing enough, about whether Emily would remember more sadness than good from these early years. But then he'd hear her giggle as Lucky chased his tail in dizzy circles, or watch her bury her face in his fur after a hard day, and those worries would quiet for just a little while. Lucky hadn't fixed their problems, but he made them feel like maybe, just maybe, they weren't facing them alone anymore. The wind had a sharpness to it that hinted at snow, though the skies remained stubbornly clear. Michael tugged his jacket tighter and adjusted the stack of flyers under his arm as he crossed the parking lot of the corner diner. The taped-up flyer in the window flapped lazily, one of a dozen he'd posted around town that morning. Found dog, white and brown mutt, red bandana, no tags, found near Elm and Holloway. Call Michael, 217-555-0194. Simple, straightforward. No mention of how Lucky had already started sleeping at the foot of Emily's bed. No note about how the dog had somehow become a piece of their daily rhythm in just a few short days. He stepped into the hardware store next, nodding to Gary behind the counter. "Mind if I hang this?" Gary gave a shrug. "Sure thing. That the dog your little girl's been walking around with?" "Yeah," Michael said. He hesitated, thumb brushing the edge of the flyer. "We're just trying to see if someone's missing him." Gary nodded slowly, but didn't say anything more. Out on Main Street, Michael stapled another flyer to the community board outside the library, right next to an ad for a used washing machine and a missing cat poster that had been sun-bleached nearly white. He stepped back and stared at the paper, the corners already curling in the cold air. A strange weight settled in his chest. He'd done the right thing, what anyone would do. You find something that doesn't belong to you, you try to return it. But Lucky didn't feel lost anymore. He felt like he belonged with them. Michael leaned against the lamppost, watching traffic drift lazily through the town square. The thought of getting a call from some stranger who wanted to reclaim Lucky, someone who might not even know what they had, twisted in his gut. Still, he sighed and moved on to the next post. He had to try. That was the decent thing to do, even if a part of him hoped the phone never rang. The house had settled into its nightly hush. Emily was long asleep, curled into a ball, with Lucky pressed against her side, his slow breathing syncing with hers. The television in the living room flickered low, some old black-and-white movie Michael wasn't really watching. He sat on the couch, paperwork spread out in front of him, pretending to make sense of overdue invoices and repair orders. Then his phone rang. It startled him, not just because it was nearly midnight, but because no one ever called this late. He stared at the screen. Unknown number. For a second, he almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a voice, soft, polite, almost hesitant. "Hi, I hope I'm not calling too late. I saw your flyer, the one about the dog." Michael sat up straighter. Yeah, I did put those up. I think he might be mine." The voice on the other end was female, refined but not cold. There was a trace of something unplaceable in her tone, maybe nerves, maybe sadness. "He's white and brown," she continued, "medium-sized, has a bit of a limp in one leg. He was wearing a red bandana?" Michael swallowed. That was him, no doubt. "I found him a few nights ago," he said. "He was soaked and half frozen under my bench. No chip, no tag, just the bandana." The line was quiet for a beat. "That sounds like him," the woman said softly. "His name's Jasper." Michael blinked. Jasper. That didn't sound right, but maybe that was just Emily's voice in his head, calling him Lucky over and over until it stuck. "I'm Clare," she added. "Clare Whitmore. I was passing through the area when he got out. I've been looking for him ever since." Michael rubbed the back of his neck. "You're not from around here, then?" "No," she said. Just needed to get away for a bit. Jasper ran off the first night." He glanced down the hallway toward the bedroom where Lucky, Jasper, was fast asleep. "Would you be willing to meet?" she asked, her voice almost tentative. "I'd like to see if it's really him." Michael hesitated, then nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Yeah, I think we can do that." Michael couldn't sleep. After the call ended, he sat on the edge of the couch long after the TV timed out and the living room sank into darkness. The voice still echoed in his ears, smooth, deliberate, a kind of careful warmth behind each word. Clare Whitmore. Even her name sounded like it belonged in a glossy magazine or stitched into a monogrammed suitcase. She hadn't said much, and what little she did share was wrapped in just enough vagueness to raise questions. Passing through, needed to get away. He'd heard those words before, people stopping through town, running from something or toward something else. Most didn't call at midnight, asking about a lost dog with a voice that made you feel like you were speaking to someone who'd never raised her voice in a hurry, not even once. She'd asked to meet the next day, somewhere public, somewhere quiet. They agreed on the town dog park late afternoon, when Michael would be off work and Emily would still be at her after-school art program. He figured it'd be easier without a 7-year-old standing between them, ready to declare war on anyone who tried to take Lucky away. He glanced down the hall again. The dog was stretched out in Emily's room, dead to the world, his back legs twitching as he dreamed, probably about squirrels or meatloaf. He looked like he belonged here, like he'd always belonged here. Michael ran a hand through his hair and sighed. In the morning, he didn't tell Emily about the call. He didn't lie, exactly, just said he had to meet someone about the flyers. She barely looked up from her cereal, too busy drawing whiskers on Lucky with a red crayon. At the garage, he couldn't focus. Every clank of a wrench and roar of an engine seemed muffled, like his mind was on pause until that meeting. There was a tension in his chest. Not dread, but not relief either. Something in between. Uncertainty had a way of making everything else feel heavier. Still, one thing kept nagging at him: Claire's voice. How even through a crackly signal and a quiet line, it had managed to sound like something important was being left unsaid. The dog park sat just off Maple Street, wedged between the ball fields and an old church whose steeple cast long shadows in the late afternoon sun. It wasn't much, just a fenced-in patch of grass and gravel, with a few benches and a rusted water fountain that barely worked. But it was quiet, tucked away, and familiar. Michael figured it was as good a place as any to meet someone whose name sounded like it belonged in a country club registry. Lucky trotted alongside him, tail up, nose twitching as they approached the gate. Michael had brought an old tennis ball, though Lucky never seemed interested in actually bringing it back. Still, it gave them something to do while they waited. They didn't wait long. A silver SUV pulled into the gravel lot, clean, sleek, too new for this side of town. The door opened, and out stepped Clare. She was dressed simply. Dark jeans, a soft gray sweater, and boots that probably cost more than Michael's monthly grocery bill. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, sunglasses perched on her head. Nothing flashy. But even so, she didn't blend in. There was a kind of polish to her, like she carried the weight of a different world, one with quieter rooms and smoother roads. Claire scanned the park and found him almost instantly. She offered a small wave as she crossed the grass, her steps light but purposeful. "Michael?" she asked, voice the same calm melody he remembered from the phone. He nodded, standing. "That's me. And this here is the dog you've been missing." Lucky paused mid-sniff and looked up at her, tail giving a slow wag. Claire knelt down, reaching out a hand. "Jasper?" she said softly. The dog stepped forward, curious but cautious. He sniffed her palm, gave her hand a single lick, then glanced back at Michael like he was asking for permission. Claire smiled, tight, maybe even a little sad. "That's him," she murmured. Michael studied her face, searching for something. Relief, maybe, or guilt. But what he saw instead was something quieter. Longing. And maybe, just maybe, a little uncertainty of her own. Emily spotted Clare before Michael could say anything. She came barreling across the grass from the car, school backpack still slung over one shoulder, her braids bouncing as she ran. "Dad! Dad, you didn't tell me she was here already!" she shouted, skidding to a stop beside Lucky, who perked up at the sound of her voice. Claire stood from where she'd been kneeling, brushing her hands on her jeans. Her smile was gentle, but there was something tight around the edges of it, like she wasn't sure whether she was supposed to smile at all. Emily dropped to her knees and threw her arms around Lucky's neck. "You're not going anywhere, okay? You're mine now. You promised." She looked up, squinting at Claire. You're the lady from the phone, aren't you? Michael gave a quiet sigh. Emily. Claire crouched down again, matching Emily's eye level. Yes, she said softly. I'm Clare, and you must be Emily. Emily nodded, her arms still wrapped tight around Lucky's damp fur. He likes it here. He sleeps in my bed and eats toast crusts and helps with story time. Claire let out a soft laugh, but her eyes shimmered in a way that had nothing to do with amusement. It sounds like he's been very lucky. Michael watched her carefully. She wasn't reaching for the leash. She wasn't trying to take Lucky by the collar. If anything, her hand stayed pressed firmly to her knees, as if she knew she didn't have the right to touch anything yet. I've missed him, she said after a moment, but maybe he's where he needs to be now. Emily's grip loosened slightly. Did you love him? Claire's smile cracked just a little. Yes, I still do. Lucky stood quietly between them, tail wagging in slow, uncertain arcs, sensing the weight in the air, but unsure of its meaning. Claire glanced up at Michael, her expression unreadable. There was something flickering there, regret, guilt, or maybe it was the realization of what she had lost. Not just a dog, but time that couldn't be rewound. Michael stepped closer, hands in his pockets. We don't have to decide anything today, he said. Claire nodded once, her eyes never leaving Lucky. Okay. But as the wind picked up and the sun dipped lower, it became clear this wasn't just a reunion. It was the beginning of a choice none of them were quite ready to make. They lingered in the dog park longer than Michael expected. The late afternoon sun dipped low, casting golden light through the bare branches that lined the fence. Lucky alternated between sniffing tufts of grass and flopping onto his side beside Emily, who had taken to telling him a made-up story about a pirate dog who found a treasure made entirely of bacon. Claire stayed quiet through most of it, watching with a stillness that made Michael uneasy, not because she seemed cold, but because she seemed torn. She sat on the bench across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, gaze fixed not on the dog, but on the little girl whose laugh floated through the breeze like wind chimes. I know this is probably strange, she said finally, breaking the silence, but would it be all right if he stayed with you a little longer? Michael blinked. Excuse me? Just a few more days, Claire clarified, her voice calm but deliberate. It's been weeks since he ran off. I don't know what he's been through, and I want to be sure, really sure, that I'm the right place for him now. Michael studied her. There was no edge to her voice, no accusation, just something raw underneath the polish, like maybe this wasn't just about a dog. Maybe it never had been. You don't think he'd want to come back with you? He asked. Claire gave a soft, almost sad laugh. He might, but watching him with Emily, I'm not sure I should ask him to. From across the park, Emily waved. Dad, look, Lucky found a stick the size of my arm. Michael smiled faintly, but his eyes didn't leave Claire. You're not like most people who come looking for a lost pet. I'm not like most people, she replied, then immediately looked away as if she hadn't meant to say that part out loud. He nodded slowly. You can check in, stop by. Just know he's part of our world now, even if it's temporary. Claire exhaled as if releasing something she'd been holding on to a little too tightly. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more than you know. The sun was nearly down by the time they left the park, the sky washed in soft purples and orange streaks, the kind of colors that made even a dusty little town like theirs feel like something out of a painting. Emily climbed into the back seat with Lucky at her heels, chattering away about how he needed his own pirate hat and maybe a dog-sized sword for future adventures. Michael closed the passenger door with a quiet thunk, then turned to Claire. She stood beside her SUV, arms folded across her chest, her expression unreadable in the fading light. So, he said, hands deep in his jacket pockets, you want me to keep him for now? Claire nodded once. Just a little longer. He studied her again, trying to read between the lines. Everything about her, the calm voice, the careful posture, the perfectly neutral tone, told him she was used to control, but underneath that, there was something quieter, something soft. He didn't trust easily, not anymore. Not when it came to people who showed up out of nowhere and asked for favors without offering much in return. But there was something in her eyes that reminded him of Emily on hard days. Not tears, but the weight just behind them. "He's not a rental, you know," Michael said, trying to keep his voice even. "This isn't a test drive." Claire offered a small smile. "I understand. I'm not sure if he'll want to leave." "And you?" he asked. "What do you want?" That question hung in the space between them. Claire glanced toward the car where Emily now had Lucky wrapped in an old towel, gently brushing off bits of grass. "I don't know," she said. "I used to be sure of everything. Then I wasn't." Michael nodded slowly, not because he understood her completely, but because he understood what it meant to lose your footing in the middle of a life you thought you had figured out. "One more day," he said. "Come by tomorrow. We'll see where things are then." Claire looked up, surprised by the offer, then nodded with something like gratitude flickering in her gaze. "Thank you, Michael." He gave a faint shrug. "Don't thank me yet." The next day Claire showed up just after lunch, a paper bag in one hand and a faint smile on her face. She knocked lightly, like someone unsure of their place, and Michael answered the door with a raised brow and grease smudged across his cheek. "I brought coffee," she said, lifting the bag slightly, "and a few treats for Lucky." Michael stepped aside, letting her in with a nod that wasn't exactly warm, but not unkind either. "He's out back with Emily. She's making him wear socks." Claire laughed, a real one this time, light and quick. "That sounds about right." She made her way to the backyard slowly, like she was stepping into a memory that didn't belong to her. Emily sat cross-legged in the grass, one of Lucky's paws gently wrapped in a striped sock, the other already pulled off and lying nearby. Lucky looked vaguely humiliated, but entirely content. "Hi again?" Claire said softly. Emily looked up and grinned. "Look, he's letting me dress him like a superhero. This one's his flying sock." Claire crouched beside her, smoothing her sweater as she settled in. "You're quite the stylist." Emily beamed, then returned to her work, too young to question why someone would come all this way just to watch a dog play dress-up. Michael stood at the kitchen window watching them for a moment before returning to the garage. He didn't know what Claire's story was, only that she kept showing up. She'd come by again the next afternoon and the day after that, always with something small in hand, a cup of tea, a homemade biscuit she claimed she'd baked, though the box of pastries peeking from her car suggested otherwise, a new chew toy for Lucky. But what Michael noticed most wasn't what she brought. It was how she watched. Not just the dog, but Emily, the way she smiled when Emily sang to Lucky or skipped through the yard, the quiet ache in her eyes when she saw them laughing at nothing. She'd say she was just checking in, but Michael knew better. Claire wasn't watching to see if Lucky still remembered her. She was watching a life that looked nothing like hers. And maybe, just maybe, she wished it did. It was Emily's idea, naturally. "Dad," she'd said, tugging on his sleeve that Saturday afternoon, "can we go get ice cream, please? Lucky needs to try vanilla." Michael had raised an eyebrow. "Dogs don't need ice cream." "Vanilla's gentle," she said seriously, like she was quoting a medical journal. "Plus, he deserves a treat. He let me put sunglasses on him all morning." Claire had been leaning on the porch rail, sipping coffee from one of those biodegradable cups that looked like it cost more than Michael's whole lunch. She laughed. "She's not wrong." And so, somehow, the three of them, and Lucky, ended up at Rose's Creamery, the little walk-up stand at the edge of town, where the ice cream was $1.50 and the napkins always ran out by mid-afternoon. Emily perched on the bench with her chocolate swirl, dribbling melted drops onto her knees. Lucky sat dutifully at her feet, licking from a tiny cup of vanilla while wearing a purple bandana Emily had insisted he needed for flair. Michael leaned against the back of the bench, arms folded, watching the two of them like a man who still wasn't sure how this had become his Saturday. Clare sat beside him, a small cup of lemon sorbet in hand, though she didn't seem too interested in it. Her gaze drifted toward the open field behind the stand, where a group of kids were chasing a soccer ball, and a couple of teens leaned against a rusted fence, laughing. "It's been a long time since I've done anything like this," she said quietly. Michael glanced over. "What, eaten ice cream?" "No," she said, smiling faintly. "Just lived like this. Small things, people talking without an agenda, sunshine, a lazy afternoon." He didn't say anything at first. He just watched her, noting the way her shoulders relaxed, the way her fingers lingered on the rim of her cup, like she wasn't ready to let the moment go. "You could get used to it," he said finally. Clare looked over at him, and for once she didn't deflect. "Maybe I already am." It started with a glint, just a small flash of light off glass, the kind that catches the eye for a second before vanishing. Michael was under the hood of a '98 Ford Explorer, sweat rolling down his back despite the breeze. He straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag as he squinted across the street. There was a man near the corner, leaning against a rusted sedan that hadn't moved in weeks. Nothing unusual about a guy on his phone, except he wasn't scrolling. He was pointing something. A camera. Small, discreet, but unmistakable. Michael narrowed his eyes. A few seconds later, the man turned and casually disappeared around the corner, as if he hadn't just been aiming a lens straight at the garage and at Clare, who was sitting out front with Emily and Lucky, helping them sort through a box of sidewalk chalk. He walked over, slow but steady, like he didn't want to startle anyone. "Hey," he said low, glancing at Clare. "You recognize that guy across the street?" Clare looked up, shielding her eyes with one hand. "What guy?" "He's gone now. Had a camera. Was aiming it at you." She stilled for half a beat, just long enough. Then, "Could have been someone just taking street shots. People do that." Michael didn't buy it. Her voice was too even, too practiced. "Right," he said carefully. "A lot of people interested in car garages these days." Clare smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I wouldn't worry about it." Michael didn't push, but he noticed. Not just her calmness, but the way she stood up a little straighter after that, glancing over her shoulder more than once. Emily, blissfully unaware, was busy drawing a big heart in pink chalk with Lucky scrawled across the center. The dog sat beside her like a knight guarding a princess. Michael leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching Clare from the side. She hadn't lied, technically, but she hadn't told the truth either. And if there were cameras showing up in Maplewood, it meant someone was looking for her, or watching her. Either way, it wasn't the kind of quiet life she'd been pretending to want. It had been bothering him for days now, the way Clare sidestepped questions, the way her eyes flickered at the mention of strangers, and that man with the camera who vanished like smoke. Michael wasn't a suspicious person by nature. Life had thrown him enough hard hits to make him cautious, sure, but not cynical. Still, the pieces weren't adding up, and he was tired of pretending they were. So after Emily went to bed and Lucky had curled up at the foot of her blanket, snoring like a worn-out engine, Michael sat down at the kitchen table with his laptop and typed in the name she'd given him. Clare Whitmore. Too vague. Dozens of hits. A real estate agent in Oregon, a travel blogger with too many vowels in her captions. None of them felt right. Then he paused, frowning. Something from that first call came back to him. A hesitation, a tiny slip when she'd introduced herself. Had she said Whitmore or something else? He tried another name. A guess. Clare Wentworth. The results loaded instantly, the screen blooming with images and headlines like fireworks in a dark sky. Clare Wentworth, heiress to the Wentworth Hotel Group, disappears from NYC Gala. The elusive hotel heiress. Where is Clare now? From penthouse to privacy, Clare Wentworth's sudden vanishing act. Michael stared at the photos. There she was. Same face, same eyes, same quiet intensity, though in the pictures she was usually in heels, surrounded by polished people in polished rooms. Nothing like the woman who sat cross-legged on his porch with sidewalk chalk on her jeans and her hair pulled back with a drugstore scrunchie. Heiress, of that Wentworth family, the ones who owned half the skyline in Manhattan and at least 2 islands depending on who you asked. He leaned back in his chair, heart thudding quietly in his chest. So this wasn't just about a lost dog. Clare hadn't just been passing through, she'd been hiding. And somehow she'd ended up in his town, at his garage, eating ice cream with his daughter like she belonged. Michael closed the laptop slowly, one thought circling his mind louder than the rest. What the hell had he just gotten into? Michael didn't sleep that night. He kept playing it over in his head, her voice, her smiles, the small kindnesses that had slipped into his life so effortlessly. The way she looked at Emily like she mattered, not out of politeness, but something deeper, real. And yet there it was, Clare Wentworth, a name that didn't belong in Maplewood, a name with weight and wealth behind it, the kind that could buy entire towns like his and not blink twice. The next morning she showed up like usual, quiet knock, travel mug in hand, hair wind-tossed from the drive. She smiled soft and familiar, but now he saw it differently. Every detail was sharper, shaded with something he couldn't ignore. "Can we talk?" he asked, stepping onto the porch. Clare blinked, hesitated. Of course. He led her around the house to the backyard, away from Emily, who was brushing Lucky's fur under the old elm tree. Once they were out of earshot, he folded his arms and looked at her hard. "Wentworth," he said flatly. "That's your real name, isn't it?" Clare's expression didn't change, not at first, but there was a slow exhale, like she'd been waiting for this moment to catch up to her. "Yes," she said simply. "You lied?" "I didn't lie," she replied quietly. "I withheld." Michael scoffed. "Same difference." She looked down at her hands, twisting the ring she always wore on her right thumb. "I wasn't trying to fool you. I just needed to be someone else for a little while, someone normal, someone who could breathe without cameras in her face or boardrooms deciding what her next move should be." "And the dog?" Clare's smile was faint. "His real name is Jasper. He escaped on the second day of my so-called getaway. I panicked, looked everywhere. Then I saw your flyer a few towns over. Thought maybe it was a coincidence. But when I heard your voice on the phone—" She trailed off, shrugging. "I didn't plan to stay," she added. "But I saw how happy he was here, how happy you were. And Emily—" Michael shook his head. "You should have told me." "I know," Clare said softly, "but I didn't want this to end the minute you knew who I was." She looked up, and this time there was no gloss of charm, just honesty. "I didn't come here to take him back, Michael. I came here because I lost more than a dog when I ran. And somehow, in this tiny town, I started to find myself again." Michael didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, jaw tight, hands clenched into fists at his sides. Clare waited silent, her eyes never leaving his face, even as the seconds dragged out like hours. "You should have told me the truth," he said finally, his voice low, firm. "I know," Clare replied, her tone steady but soft. "No, I don't think you do," he snapped, sharper this time. "You walked into my life pretending to be just some woman passing through. You smiled at my daughter. You sat on my porch. You let me believe you were like the rest of us." Clare's face flickered, pain crossing her features, but she didn't defend herself. Michael ran a hand through his hair, breathing hard through his nose. "I've had enough smoke blown at me to last a lifetime. I don't have the time or the patience for people who think honesty is optional." "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said. "Yeah, maybe not, but you still lied." He turned away, pacing a few steps before stopping to glance back at her. "Do you even know what it's like trying to raise a kid without games, without letting the world disappoint her at every turn?" Claire swallowed hard. I didn't mean to become part of your life, Michael. I just stayed longer than I thought I would. He shook his head. You had cameras following you, strange men outside my garage taking pictures, and you didn't think maybe that was something I should know? I didn't think they'd find me, she said. I didn't want us, dragged into it. There is no us, Claire, he said, his voice quiet but sharp as glass. You don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to hide from your world and mine and pretend you belong here. Claire took a small step back, stung but steady. I never meant to deceive you. And yet here we are, Michael muttered. From the yard, Emily's laughter rang out as Lucky bounded after a tossed stick, blissfully unaware. Michael glanced in their direction, his voice a little hoarse now. I'm not looking for a mystery, Claire. I've got a daughter to raise and a life I built, brick by brick. I don't need more shadows. He didn't wait for a response. He just turned and walked back toward the house, leaving her standing alone in the golden light, with nothing but the weight of everything she hadn't said. Emily waited until bedtime to say something, like she knew her words would matter more when the world was quiet and the lights were low. She was curled up in her pajamas, her favorite stuffed bear clutched in one arm, Lucky sprawled at the foot of the bed with his nose tucked beneath his tail. Michael sat beside her, smoothing the covers. He'd been distracted all evening, moving through dinner like a ghost, saying little, thinking too much. He hadn't told Emily what happened exactly, just said Claire wouldn't be coming by for a while. But Emily, small as she was, had a way of noticing things other people missed. She didn't mean to make you mad, she said quietly. Michael looked down at her. She didn't. Emily's voice didn't waver. I know she's not from here. I figured it out. Her clothes are fancy and her shoes don't even make dirt. But she was nice. She always listened, even when I talked too much. Michael sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. It's not just about being fancy, sweetheart. It's about telling the truth, about not pretending to be someone you're not. Emily looked at him, her eyes steady. You didn't tell her about Mom right away. That caught him off guard. That's different, he said gently. Maybe, she whispered, but maybe it's not. Sometimes people don't tell everything because they're scared, or they don't know how. Doesn't mean they're trying to hurt anybody. He didn't have an answer for that, not one that made sense in words. Emily reached out and took his hand. Her palm was small and warm and sure. She's just sad like us, Dad, but she's trying. Michael looked at her, really looked, and saw how much this little girl had grown, not just taller, but deeper. She'd lost her mom and never once tried to pretend everything was okay. But she felt everything, even the things people didn't say. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, his throat tightening. Okay, he murmured. Okay, kiddo. Emily smiled and snuggled under the blankets, pulling Lucky closer. And for the first time that day, Michael wasn't sure who was comforting who. The shop was quiet that morning. Too quiet. No clanking tools, no buzzing radios. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional drip from a leaky pipe in the back. Michael stood at the counter with his arms crossed, staring at the stack of invoices like they might disappear if he stared long enough. The past few weeks had been a slow crawl. 2 big repairs had fallen through, and one customer bounced a check he couldn't afford to chase. He'd already cut corners where he could, delayed an oil delivery, pushed back on ordering new brake pads, but the balance sheet didn't lie. He was behind. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, already feeling the weight of what he'd have to tell Emily soon. No Christmas extras this year, and maybe no second-hand bike for her birthday. Then the bell over the garage door chimed. It was Lisa from the front office at Macon Motors, holding a manila envelope in one hand and wearing an uncertain look. "Hey, Michael," she said, stepping inside. "Got something weird for you." He raised a brow. "Weird how?" Lisa set the envelope on the counter. "Customer came by this morning, real early. Said they wanted to cover the outstanding balance on your account with our parts supplier. Told me not to say who they were, just to drop this off." Michael frowned and opened the envelope. Inside was a receipt, paid in full. Every overdue part, every bolt and filter he'd been putting off ordering, cleared. There was no note, no name, just the initials CW scribbled in the corner. Clare. Michael stared at the paper, a strange feeling working its way into his chest. Anger wasn't the first thing. It was something softer, something heavier, gratitude mixed with the sting of pride. She'd done this without asking, without showing up, without needing a thank you. He should have felt insulted. Instead, he felt something else entirely, like someone had slipped him a lifeline without asking if he wanted one. He folded the receipt and slipped it into his drawer, saying nothing. But he knew. And he wouldn't forget. The snow came faster than anyone expected. One minute it was flurries on the wind, the kind that looked pretty against the streetlights. The next, it was a wall of white swallowing Maplewood whole, roads icing over, visibility down to inches, power flickering like a candle on its last breath. Michael had been working late at the garage, trying to finish a brake job before the storm hit harder. Emily was with him, curled up in the office with a coloring book and Lucky at her feet, while the radio murmured weather warnings every 20 minutes. He didn't hear the knock at first, not until Lucky jumped up with a bark, and Emily shouted, "Dad, someone's here!" It was Clare, her cheeks flushed, coat dusted in snow, hair clinging to her face in wet curls. "I didn't realize how fast it was coming down until I was halfway here," she said, voice breathless. "I was heading to check on you guys and, well, my car's now buried a few blocks over." Michael glanced past her shoulder at the whited-out world. "Yeah. You're not driving out of this?" Claire gave a sheepish shrug. "So, I guess I'm staying." An hour later, the three of them were huddled in the back office with the space heater humming and every spare blanket piled on the floor like some makeshift campsite. Emily was giggling, wrapped in fleece and sipping hot cocoa from a chipped mug. Lucky lay across all their feet like a living rug. Michael sat cross-legged beside them, trying not to smile too much, as Claire attempted to toast marshmallows over a candle. "You ever done this before?" he asked. "Not exactly like this," she said, laughing. "Most of my winters involve catered fireplaces." He raised a brow. "What's a catered fireplace?" Claire chuckled. "Exactly what it sounds like." For a while it was just quiet laughter and cocoa, the kind of warmth that didn't come from heat, but from something slower and deeper. And then, as Emily dozed off mid-story, Lucky pressed against her side. Claire looked at Michael and whispered, "This feels like something I lost a long time ago." Michael met her eyes. "You didn't lose it. You just forgot where to look." And for the first time in a long while, hope didn't feel so fragile. The storm raged through the night, thick snow blanketing every inch of town in silence. The garage's ancient furnace groaned against the cold, but the space heater kept the office warm enough. Michael had pulled a few extra logs from the woodpile out back earlier, and now the small fireplace, rarely used except in power outages, crackled with steady flames. Emily slept soundly on the pile of blankets, one arm draped over Lucky's back. The dog didn't stir, his breathing soft and even. Outside the wind howled, but inside it was nothing but firelight and shadows. Claire sat across from Michael on the floor, her knees drawn up beneath one of his old flannel blankets, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug. Her face was softer in the glow, the sharp edges of her features warmed by the flicker of flame. "You ever wonder how life ended up here?" she asked, eyes fixed on the fire. Michael leaned back against the wall, arms resting on his knees. "Every day." She smiled, not out of amusement, but in the way someone does when they hear something that feels true. "I used to think I had it all figured out. Private school, Ivy League, boardrooms before 30. The life my parents built for me." What changed? Claire's eyes flickered. "Everything. My father passed. Suddenly. No warning. My mother, she became ice with pearls, and the board expected me to step into his place, wear the name like armor, but I didn't know how to be that person. I still don't. Michael nodded slowly, watching her carefully. So you ran. I didn't mean to run, she said, almost to herself. I just couldn't breathe anymore. For a moment neither spoke. The fire popped softly, and outside the storm pushed against the walls like a memory trying to break in. I lost my wife 3 years ago, Michael said finally. Car accident. She was picking up a birthday cake for Emily. 1 minute we were a family, the next... He trailed off, staring into the flames. I'm sorry, Claire whispered. He nodded once. You learn to keep moving, for the kid, for yourself, even if some days it's like walking through fog. Their eyes met across the space between them, not filled with pity, but recognition. Two people who hadn't planned on breaking down, who hadn't expected to be seen. Claire reached out, her fingers brushing his, and for just a second, the distance between them disappeared. The morning after the storm, the world outside the garage looked like a snow globe frozen mid-shake, pure, untouched, and far too quiet. Michael shoveled a path from the door to the street, while Emily and Lucky made snow angels in the lot, their laughter rising like smoke into the crisp air. Claire had stayed for breakfast, eggs, toast, and instant coffee served in mismatched mugs. She hadn't said much, but there was something different about the way she looked at the place, like she wasn't just passing through anymore. Later, after Emily had gone off to play with Lucky and the snowdrifts, Claire lingered in the garage, watching Michael refill an oil pan and set it aside. "Can I talk to you for a second?" she asked, stepping closer. Michael looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sure." She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I had my accountant draw something up. Just an idea." Michael frowned and took the paper. His eyes skimmed over the lines. Details, numbers, something about low-interest loans and business expansion. His heart started sinking before he even finished. "I thought maybe you could expand," Claire continued, her voice measured but hopeful. "Add 2 more bays. Update your equipment. Maybe even hire someone to help. You're doing the work of 3 people here." Michael didn't answer right away. He just folded the paper slowly, carefully, then handed it back. "Claire, I can't take your money." "It wouldn't be a gift," she said quickly. "It's an investment, silent. You keep full control, no strings." He met her eyes firm. Everything has strings, even silence. She stepped back slightly, hurt flashing across her face. "This garage is all I've got," he continued. "It's not perfect. Hell, it's barely holding together some days. But I built it. With my hands. With long nights and busted knuckles and every spare dime. I won't let someone swoop in and fix it with a check just because they feel sorry for me." Claire shook her head. "It's not pity, it's—" "Don't," he said, his voice quieter now. "Please, don't make it harder." They stood there, the cold creeping back in through the open garage door. Claire folded the paper back into her coat and gave a small nod. "Okay." But the look she gave him as she turned away wasn't wounded. It was something sadder. She just wanted to help, and he'd reminded her what it felt like to be shut out. It started with a phone call to the garage, then 2, then 5. At first, Michael thought someone had just posted the shop online, or maybe a customer left a glowing review that went viral. But then the questions started coming. Is this the garage where Claire Wentworth's been hiding? Can you confirm a relationship with Miss Wentworth? Was the dog really what brought you 2 together, or is that just part of the story? Michael hung up the 5th call mid-sentence, his pulse thudding in his ears. By the time he stepped outside, there were 3 cars parked across the street, all with out-of-state plates and long camera lenses poking out of half-lowered windows. One guy was bold enough to step onto the property with a notepad in hand. "You Michael Carter?" he called out, grinning, like he was doing Michael a favor by using his full name. "Mind if I ask a few questions about Claire?" Michael didn't respond. He just stared at him until the man backed off with an awkward laugh and a "no problem, just doing my job." It wasn't long before Claire showed up, not through the front, not with coffee or a half smile, but out back, slipping through the alley like she'd learned to avoid attention in the exact way a person who's been dodging cameras all her life would. Inside the garage, she looked pale, but composed. There was something in her eyes that Michael hadn't seen before, resignation. "They know," she said. "Yeah, I gathered." Claire let out a shaky breath. "It was only a matter of time. I thought I had more. I thought I could keep it separate, just a little longer." Michael didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Outside, another shutter clicked. Claire turned to the window, then back to him. "They'll spin it. They always do. Heiress runs to fixer-upper mechanic, or small-town savior wins the runaway bride. They'll make us characters, something to sell." Michael crossed his arms. "Then don't give them the story." Her smile was faint, sad. "It's too late. We're already in it." And standing there, with flashbulbs waiting and the world pressing in, Michael felt something shift. What they'd built, quiet, warm, unspoken, wasn't just theirs anymore. Not unless they fought for it. The storm had long passed, but the chill lingered. The kind that didn't come from weather. It came from knowing something was about to change, even if no one had said it out loud. Claire had been quiet all day. She'd smiled when Emily made her laugh, helped Michael clean up the office, even brought dinner from a local place that somehow made chicken pot pie taste like a hug. But underneath it all, she moved like someone folding a map she no longer planned to use. Michael noticed it, but said nothing. There'd already been too many words. He didn't know how to ask someone not to leave, especially someone who might not belong here in the first place. By the time night fell, the cameras had mostly gone, chased off by cold wind and boredom. A few cars still lingered at a distance, watching, waiting. But inside the garage, it was warm, quiet, almost normal. Michael fell asleep on the worn couch in the back room, Emily curled up next to him with Lucky at her feet. He meant to stay up, meant to say something to Claire, anything, but exhaustion finally won. When he woke, the room was dim, the space heater humming softly. Emily was still there, but Lucky was gone, and so was Claire. On the counter she'd left a note, handwritten, short, no flourishes, just truth. "Michael, I thought leaving quietly would be better, safer. They won't stop if I stay. And I won't let them touch your life or Emily's any more than they already have. Please don't be angry. You gave me something I didn't know I needed. A home, if only for a moment. I'll bring him back when it's safe. He's still hers too. Claire." Michael stared at the note for a long time, jaw tight, hands trembling just slightly. He walked to the window. Snow fell in lazy flakes now, harmless and quiet. But everything felt empty, too quiet. Emily stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Dad, where's Lucky?" Michael knelt beside her, brushing hair from her face, trying to find the right words. "She had to go," he said softly. They both did. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't have an answer to what came next. The days rolled on, slow and steady, like tires on a gravel road. Winter clung to Maplewood a little longer than usual, and everything seemed muted. Quieter mornings, longer shadows, cold that settled into the bones and stayed. Michael returned to routine, wake up, make breakfast, pack Emily's lunch, open the garage, fix what was broken, close shop, do it again. People stopped asking about Claire after a week or so. The camera crews left when the story cooled, disappointed there wasn't a scandal to milk, just a man, a kid, and a dog that wasn't there anymore. Michael didn't talk about it. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. He'd kept her note, folded and tucked away in the top drawer of his toolbox, beside old receipts and spare keys. Some nights, when the shop was dark and Emily was already dreaming, he'd open it again, not to read it, he had every word memorized, but to hold something that proved she'd really been there. Emily felt the absence most in the little things. She still set out a second bowl of water on the porch just in case. She still paused outside the bedroom door, expecting a tail thump or a soft bark. Sometimes, when she thought Michael wasn't listening, she'd whisper stories to the air about the pirate dog and the treasure and how Lucky would come back someday, probably wearing a crown. Michael smiled when she did that, but only a little. At the garage, he worked more than he needed to, stayed late, started early. Not because there was too much to do, but because the hum of the engine and the clatter of tools helped drown the ache in his chest. He didn't like thinking about her smile, or how she lit up when Emily talked, or how she'd touched his hand by the fire like she meant it. He missed her, not just because she was beautiful or kind, or once out of reach. He missed the way she saw them, him and Emily, as if they weren't just surviving, but worth knowing. Routine was safe, routine worked, but every now and then, Michael would glance at the road, half hoping to see a silver SUV with a dog in the passenger seat and a woman who didn't want to be gone forever. It showed up on a Tuesday, tucked between the water bill and a catalog no one had asked for. The mail was already halfway sorted when Michael spotted it, thicker than a flyer, thinner than a letter. A postcard. The front was a picture of a lighthouse, standing tall against a stormy gray sea, waves crashing against jagged rocks. He flipped it over. No return address, no name, just a few careful lines written in neat, slanted handwriting. Dear Emily, Lucky is doing well. He misses bedtime stories and toast crusts. I miss them too. I hope the snow melts soon so you can play outside again. Your friend who's thinking of you. Michael stared at the card for a long moment, thumb tracing the edge. The ink was faint, like it had been written in soft light by someone who didn't want to make a big statement, just a small promise. He handed it to Emily when she came home from school. She read it once, then again, holding it close to her chest like it was something sacred. Is it from her? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael nodded. Yeah, I think it is. Emily smiled, not wide, but deep, like something inside her had settled back into place. She didn't forget. No, he said, kneeling beside her. She didn't. Emily set the postcard on her nightstand that evening, right next to her drawing of Lucky in a superhero cape and the paper crown she'd made for him weeks ago. She didn't ask when he'd be back. She didn't ask where Clare was. She just whispered, "Good night," to both of them. Michael watched her sleep that night, the soft rise and fall of her breath, the way her fingers curled slightly around the edge of the blanket. And he thought about Clare, wherever she was, whatever weight she was carrying, and how, even from a distance, she still found a way to reach them. It wasn't much, a postcard, a few words, but sometimes that's all it takes to say, I haven't let go. Spring came slow to Maplewood, creeping in with muddy streets, early blooms, and the kind of breeze that hinted at warmth without fully delivering it. Michael had just finished replacing a transmission on an old pickup when the mail arrived. Same routine, same small-town rhythm. But today, something was different. Among the usual stack of bills and junk mail was a thick ivory envelope, heavy in his hand. His name was handwritten in black ink across the front in careful script, Michael Carter. No return address, no stamp, just delivered, somehow without fanfare. He opened it slowly, cautious like it might disappear if he breathed too hard. Inside was a cream-colored card with gold embossing along the edges. Formal. Elegant. And at the top, in raised print, the unmistakable name, the Wentworth Foundation cordially invites you to the annual Spring Gala held at the Wentworth Grand, New York City. Below that, in smaller handwriting, personal, deliberate, for your kindness, for your honesty, and because sometimes the right people need to find their way back to each other. We'd love to see you there. C. Michael sat down at the workbench, the invitation resting in his hands like it might burn him. He stared at the words, reading them again and again. It had been months since the postcard, since the snow, since the silence that followed. He'd told himself it was over, that people like Clare didn't circle back, that lives like hers didn't have room for people like him, single dads with calloused hands and too much debt. And yet, here was the invitation. Not a headline, not a tabloid photo. A message, an opening. He glanced toward the office window, where Emily was drawing in her sketchbook, tongue poking out in concentration. Lucky's old crown still sat on the shelf above her, waiting. Michael exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest shifting. Maybe it was time. Not to chase after something impossible, but to see if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't. Michael had never worn a tuxedo before. Not really. Maybe a rented suit at his wedding, maybe something close at his high school prom, but nothing like this. The jacket felt stiff across his shoulders, the tie too tight no matter how many times he adjusted it. He'd shaved twice just to be sure he didn't miss a spot. Emily had insisted. She, on the other hand, looked like she belonged in a dream. Her dress was pale blue and flowed when she walked, like a petal caught in the breeze. Her hair had been curled carefully by a neighbor who'd insisted on helping for the big night, and Michael had never seen her smile so big in all her 7 years. "Do I look fancy?" she asked as they rode the elevator up to the ballroom. "You look like royalty," he said, voice thick with pride. The Wentworth Grand stood tall in the heart of Chicago, all glass and gold and echoes. The gala was held in a chandelier-draped ballroom with waiters who glided like ghosts and a string quartet playing songs Michael couldn't name. He stepped inside with Emily on his arm and instantly felt the weight of it, of eyes, of expectation, of wealth that didn't need to say its name. People moved in designer suits and silk gowns, sipping champagne and murmuring greetings. Michael nodded when necessary, smiled where he could, but mostly he just focused on Emily, who walked through it all like she was born to it. She spotted the dessert table first, an entire stretch of delicate pastries and chocolate sculptures, and gasped like it was magic. Michael chuckled. "Go ahead." She gave him a quick hug and darted off, her curls bouncing behind her, instantly chatting up a couple in evening wear about how real royalty probably eats waffles, too. He stood by a marble pillar, uncomfortable in his skin, heart rattling in his chest. He didn't know what would happen tonight, didn't know if Clare would be here, or if this was all some kind of quiet goodbye, but he was here, dressed up, heart wide open, waiting. He hadn't seen her walk in. One moment Michael was standing near the edge of the ballroom, trying not to knock over a glass-topped centerpiece, watching Emily enthusiastically explain frosting techniques to a tuxedoed waiter. The next, he felt something shift in the room, not noise, not movement exactly, but a current, a pull. And then he saw her. Across the ballroom, near the grand staircase, Clare stood in a floor-length navy dress that shimmered like dusk under the chandeliers. Her hair was swept back, her posture composed, regal even. But her eyes, God, her eyes, lit up the moment they found him. And just like that, the rest of the room melted away. She didn't walk, she ran. Not the elegant glide expected of an heiress at a black tie event. She kicked off her heels mid-step, gathered her dress in both hands, and sprinted, barefoot across the marble floor, dodging stunned guests and startled murmurs. Michael took a breath, frozen for half a second, then stepped forward just as she collided with him in a blur of silk and warmth and everything he hadn't let himself hope for. Her arms wrapped around his neck, tight and sure, and he caught her with both hands like he'd been waiting this whole time just to hold her again. "I didn't know if you'd come," she whispered against his shoulder, voice trembling. "I almost didn't," he murmured. But Emily got an idea in her head, and well, when she gets an idea, Clare pulled back just enough to look at him, eyes shining, lips parted in something between disbelief and joy. "I missed you," she said simply. He smiled, slow, honest, tired in the way only someone who's finally found what they've been missing can be. "I missed you too." Before either of them could say another word, Emily bounded up beside them, a cupcake in one hand and a smear of frosting on her cheek. "Clare," she squealed, "you're here! You are real!" Clare dropped to her knees and wrapped her in a hug, laughing and crying all at once. And just like that, in a room full of chandeliers and crystal glasses and people who didn't understand a thing about them, they were home again. The gala faded into a soft blur around them. Music drifted on the air like perfume, but Michael and Clare had found a quiet corner near a side balcony just beyond the glow of chandeliers. Emily was nearby, chatting with a woman who'd let her try on a diamond bracelet, her laughter carrying like wind chimes through the open doors. Michael leaned on the railing, city lights stretching below them, his tux jacket unbuttoned, tie loosened. Clare stood beside him, her bare feet tucked under her gown, one hand resting lightly on the stone ledge. Neither spoke at first. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full of all the words they hadn't said, all the things they hadn't dared to name. "I should have stayed," Clare said quietly, "or at least said goodbye." Michael glanced at her. "You left a note." She nodded, her lips pressing into a faint smile. "A note isn't the same as a goodbye, not for you, not for Emily." "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." Clare looked out over the city, her voice soft. "I was scared, Michael, not just of the press or the fallout. I was scared of you, of what it meant to feel something real again. That night in the garage, when everything was so small and honest and kind, I hadn't had that in years. I didn't think I deserved it." Michael stayed quiet, his jaw tightening. "I kept telling myself I was protecting you," she added, "but maybe I was just protecting myself." He took a slow breath, then turned toward her. "You weren't the only one running, Clare." She looked up at him, surprised. "I didn't want help. Not your money, not your name. I let pride talk louder than common sense, and I let it build a wall between us the minute things got complicated." "You were trying to protect what you'd built," she said softly. He nodded. "But I forgot that not everything good has to come hard." They stood there, both stripped down in the ways that mattered. No masks, no stories, no distance. Just truth. "I still don't know what this is," Clare said, her voice catching. "But I know I don't want to run from it anymore." Michael reached for her hand, fingers brushing gently against hers. "Then don't," he said. "I'm still here. We both are." And for the first time, neither of them looked away. The gala wound down in a blur of soft music and goodbyes, the kind of polite murmurs reserved for charity donors and old money acquaintances. Clare stayed close to Michael and Emily, her hand occasionally brushing his, as if to make sure he was still real, still there. When the three of them stepped outside onto the wide front steps of the Wentworth Grand, the city air hit them with a cool gust. A black limousine pulled up, sleek and silent, its windows dark and gleaming under the streetlights. Clare turned to Emily with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "I think someone's been waiting to see you." Emily blinked up at her. "Who?" Clare just smiled and opened the back door. And there he was. Lucky. Curled on the leather seat like a prince in exile, his tail thumped once, twice, and then faster, his whole body wiggling with joy as he caught sight of Emily. "Lucky!" she screamed, launching herself into the limo without hesitation. The dog practically tackled her with licks and happy whines, the same red bandana still tied around his neck, faded and frayed, just as it had been the first night they found him. Michael stood still for a moment, taking it in. The reunion, the way Emily's joy lit up the street more than any of the city's bright towers. His heart twisted in the best way. Clare stepped back, giving them the moment. "He never stopped waiting," she said quietly. "He'd sit by the door every night. Every time a car slowed down, he'd perk up like he expected it to be you." Michael looked at her, his voice rough. "You kept him safe." "I promised I would." Emily poked her head out of the limo, eyes wide. "Dad, he smells like fancy soap." Clare laughed, stepping into the car beside them. "It was either that or let him roll in hotel sheets." Michael climbed in last, settling into the seat as Lucky sprawled across all three of them like he was never going to let go again. In that moment, the limo didn't feel like a luxury. It felt like home finding its way back, on four legs with a red bandana and a heart big enough for all of them. The for sale sign came down on a Tuesday, the paint on the little white cottage still fresh, the shutters newly hung. It wasn't big, 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, a yard that needed work, but it sat just 4 houses down from Michael's place, with a crooked picket fence and a porch swing that squeaked when you sat in it. Clare stood in the front yard, holding a ring of keys in one hand, squinting up at the roof like she wasn't entirely sure what she'd gotten herself into. Her heels were gone, replaced by sneakers. Her tailored coats had been traded for cardigans, jeans, a windbreaker that already had dog hair clinging to it. Lucky bounded across the grass, chasing a squirrel that had absolutely no interest in being caught. Emily followed, giggling, waving a paper kite she insisted was magic. Michael walked up the sidewalk with a toolbox in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other. "You really bought it," he said, stopping beside her. Clare looked over, smiling. "I really did." He handed her the coffee. "Place needs work." "So do I," she said, with the kind of honesty that didn't flinch any more. "I thought I needed penthouses and boardrooms to feel like I belonged. Turns out all I needed was a garage and a girl who thinks I'm good at bedtime stories." Michael chuckled. "And a dog. Definitely the dog." They watched Emily for a moment as she tried to convince Lucky to sit in her makeshift wagon. He didn't, but he humored her, which was close enough. Clare looked back at Michael. "You think it's crazy? Me being here?" He shook his head. "I think you're exactly where you're supposed to be." She reached for his hand, and he didn't hesitate this time. No walls. No pride, just warmth. Clare Wentworth had left behind a life of private jets and polished masks. What she found instead was a little town with cracked sidewalks and stubborn winters, a widowed mechanic, a fearless girl with sidewalk chalk dreams, and a dog who always knew the way home. It wasn't the life she was born into, it was the one she chose, and for the first time, it felt like hers.